Okay, I thought it might be useful for some of you guys to gain a little more insight into the MTC2 and all the changes we can make and the effect and the magnitude those changes may have. So a few things I want to do. I want to keep this fairly short. The first thing I wanted to address is there's a lot of confusion out there about the softer springs that are used in on the MTC2 versus the 1 versus X-Ray, Yokomo, any of the other TCs out there. A lot of people seem to think that because the spring is softer, the overall suspension is softer as well. Well, that's simply not true. The reason, or the stiffness of the suspension at the wheel is determined by a property called the motion ratio. Motion ratio is the ratio between the distance from the inner pivot point to where the shock mounts divided by the overall length of the arm. So in the Mugen, this number is 0.75. In the X-ray, it's 0.64. So essentially what that means is you need to get the same load out here, you need a softer spring than you would with the X-ray where the shock is mounted further inboard. It's easiest to think of this as like a wheelbarrow. With this as the wheel out here, the shock is your weight, and the handles are here. So the further out towards the handles the load is, the lighter the load can be to get the same force out here. So moving the shock mount further inboard, you would need a heavier load to get the same weight out here at the end of the arm. That's pretty much as simple as it is. The shock angle also affects the motion ratio. But I don't want to get into specific details here. We can get further into that if somebody wants in a later video. What I want to show now is the effect of changing shock angle. So if we zoom in here, each one of these little crosses represents a 0.5 millimeter change in the upper shock mounting position. So the more shims you have, the more vertical the shock is, the more or the stiffer the shock or the spring feels relative to the wheel. So this shows it with 4 millimeters of shims there. If I take all those shims out, go down to 0, you can see here the ride stiffness, which is also called the wheel rate, has been reduced quite a bit. The lower this number is, the softer the suspension is. So this is the effect of the spring measured out here at the wheel, which is where we really care about it. So that represents about a 12% change in the overall spring stiffness. So if we reset this, how much change do we need to make in spring to get a similar result here? So if I just change this to 6.5 turn spring, so go to a softer spring, you can see our ride stiffness has gone down a little bit, but not as much as when we laid the shock down. So let's go one more step. Let's go to the 675, and now we're almost there. So in simple terms, each 2 millimeters of change to the shims here is essentially equivalent to changing one spring rate. So this is a very fast, easy way to change things. There are some differences in how the damping is affected based on whether you're changing a spring or whether you're just laying the shock angle down. Don't really want to get into that here, but I can if somebody's interested. Or you can just install a program and play with it yourself. Okay, I'm going to go and reset this, and now I'm going to talk about the bottom. So we can also adjust the position of the the lower position of the shock as well relative to the arm. So this changes our motion ratio too. So if I take the bottom of the shock and move it outboard to the outboard position, you can see here the ride stiffness goes up a little bit. Not much, a little bit. It also affects the roll stiffness and roll couple and everything else. Very small change though. The other thing moving this out is it also does change the position of the anti-roll bar, so it moves it a little further out as well, which has the effect of stiffening it too. So we can do a 1.1 rear out, and we have a 1.1 rear in, which is where we were before. So if we go 1.1 rear out, you see that the stiffness due to the anti-roll bar has increased slightly, and along with all the other changes. This total difference here amounts to maybe 1 to 2% change. So it's what I would call a micro adjustment, but in some cases that may be what you're looking for. So you can use this bottom position to achieve a very, very small incremental change. Okay, that's all I wanted to talk about for shocks right now. So now let's talk a bit about roll centers. So this is the kit setup with the Carpet EU settings. So if you've built your car, you're probably familiar with this. The big thing regarding the suspension setup here is that the rear roll center is a couple millimeters higher than the front. Reason you want to do this is it helps to rotate the car through the corner when the rear roll center is higher than the front, because it has the effect of stiffening the rear in roll. How they did that may not be readily apparent to everybody, but they did that by just adding a 1 millimeter shim out here on the hub. So if I change that back to match the front, you can see now we've got the same roll center front and rear. So it's nice thing about this is very simple, easy change to make. You just have to unscrew the bottom and put another shim or take a shim out. Very simple, easy change to make. You will have to adjust droop if you make that change, but yeah, pretty simple change to make a fairly dramatic change in your roll center, which is the other point. Notice here that that 1 millimeter change in shim had a 2 millimeter change in the roll center position. So the thing to note out of all this is changes to the roll center are best implemented by changing the angle of the lower arm. You get more bang for your buck by changing the shimming of the lower arm than changing the shimming of the upper arm. So let's have a quick look at the upper arm here. So if I do the same thing, I take a 1 millimeter shim out of the inner position here. Let's just get to 1 millimeter. So okay, so now I went from 2 millimeters to 1 millimeter, and I only have a 1 millimeter change in the roll center. So the other thing the upper arm does is it has more of an impact on camber gain. So the general rule of thumb here is that I go by anyways, is if I want to make a roll center change, I'll generally go to the lower arm. If I want to make a camber gain change, I'll go to the upper arm. Just the way I do it. It works well. It helps in your thought processes as well. If you think of the upper arm as more of a camber gain change, and the lower arm is more of a roll center change. So that's all I wanted to talk about in this. If there's something else you guys would like me to have a look at, then please let me know, and I will do my best. So have a great day.